Hello. It is an honor for me to introduce, well, she's called Her Excellency, Madame Penda Mbow at home, because she is the Minister of Francophone Affairs and a personal advisor to the President of Senegal. So she's a very important person in Senegal. I've known her for a few years. I knew her as a history professor at the University Cheikh Anta Diop in Dakar. And Dr. Penda Mbow has a PhD from the University of Aix-Marseille in France in the title of her dissertation was Mamluk Military Aristocracy According to Ibn al-Jiyan, a comparison of medieval Islam in Africa and in Middle Ages in France. And so she has published a number of articles and books on Islam in medieval times, and also on women in today's societies in Africa. And she will be giving a lecture tomorrow for women's studies on women in the public sphere in Africa at 12 in B092 JFSB. And she knows a lot about it because she is very much in the public sphere in Senegal. So she's an activist, she is a historian, and she is a very passionate speaker, you will find out. And I will turn the time over to her now. Please welcome Her Excellency, Madame Penda Mbow.
Thank you very much, Madame Chantal Thompson. I really thanks the Kennedy Center, his director, the African Studies, Madame Thompson, and all of you present this morning. I am a French-speaking person, but I will do my best to speak in English you can understand. Today I must speak about democracy, citizenship, and Islam in Africa. I can tell you it's a very important topic and a big deal. Islam and democracy, we have a lot of debate concerning Islam and democracy. And of course, I think in different countries, we have the ignorance of experience of African situation. This presentation tried to seek why Africa must be in discussion with a particular focus on Senegal. I just give you the map here of Africa and the situation of Islam, percentage of Muslim population, for example. Senegal is a country where you can find 90%, for example, more than 90% of our population which are Muslim. What is the outline of our presentation? I will speak very briefly about the emergence of political Islam, history of Islam in Africa. We didn't need, for example, to take a lot of time for that. The question of citizenship in the political and religious order, and the Senegalese experience, history of current issue. The emergence of political Islam, I can tell you, the turning point is 1979 with the Iranian Revolution and the situation, for example, in Algeria and the Islamic Salvation Front. Perhaps now we forget what was happening in Algeria, but it was the first time we speak about this question of Islamic Salvation Front and the question of Egypt and Muslim Brotherhood. You see what is happening on the election these last years and what is happening to the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood, and we're still having some trouble and problem in Egypt because a very old question, this question of Muslim Brotherhood. I think also the influence of some country is very important. Here I have Saudi Arabia and the role played by Wahhabism, but not only Saudi Arabia. I speak about Iranian revolution. Iran also tried to have, for example, a space in Africa. Even traditionally, the Islam in Africa is an Islam of Maliki, Sunni, Maliki law and Sunni, for example, Islam. But now you have some opening for the Iranian and the Shiite in general. I mentioned the situation of Libya. Why I mentioned the situation of Libya? If you follow, for example, in Africa, the debate and what is happening, the situation of Libya after the death, for example, of Muammar Gaddafi is very complicated. I think it is what is happening in northern Mali is a result of the situation of Libya and the lot of arm you find there and the spread of this arm through the Sahara participated to the Tuareg rebellion and, for example, kind of Islamic rebellion, which is very, very, very hard for the government of Mali and for all West African countries, and specifically the Sahelian country. It is why I mentioned Libya, and Libya also is a country which was very important to stop immigration from Sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean Sea. But you have a lot of drama today, because in Libya, this kind of door is open, and no control, and what is happening is very hard. And of course, the issue of terrorism also is very important. I speak to northern Mali, but you have Boko Haram, which is spread, and the actuality on Boko Haram is all the time creating a very big difficulty. And you see what happened to these girls from their schools and what is happening. And the issue of Boko Haram is not only interesting Nigeria, but it interests, for example, all these countries around Nigeria, like North Cameroon, where you have also a lot of Muslims. The issue of Boko Haram also interests other countries like Burkina Faso, the north of Burkina Faso, and a country like Chad, which, for example, lost recently many people, specifically from the arm. And in East Africa also, the role playing by the Shabab is still very, very difficult for a country like Kenya, and of course it is the consequence of the poor situation, political situation in Somalia. And Islam have a lot of experience across the Sahara. For example, you have influence of Indonesia, not only Indonesia, Iran. For example, if you go to a country like Kenya, the East Coast in Kenya, you have a lot of influence from the south, from the Asia, and specifically from Yemen. And you see the situation in Yemen also, and the role play by the Islamic group in the Yemen. Eastern Africa, it had a lot of influence from Middle East, and West Africa, influence not only by North Africa, but the rest, of course, of Muslim country. I say history of Islam is very important, and old Islam through the Sahara, and the domination of form of Islam is the Sufism, and Islam is, the spread of Islam is reality during the colonial period, and it is why you have, in a country, for example, like Senegal, but not only Senegal, a kind of interplay of political and religious identity, even after independence, even today. I speak about how Islam was spread. Islam was, before, for example, the colonial system, a religion of course not imposed on people of West Africa, and you have few jihad during the 16th and 17th century, but generally, you have peaceful Islam coexisting with the traditional religion. It is why, for example, in a country you can speak about tolerance, because Islam is very old, but the ancient religion also are very important. And what is happening is during the colonial period, you have Islam, and before the colonial period, the Atlantic trade slavery system, you have Islam becoming a kind of resistance for the population. And why the question of citizenship is very important. I think you have political community and nation state, which are not reality everywhere. in a country of Senegal, you can speak about a political rise and the role played by the nation state specifically after the independence, because Senegal belonged to what we call an area very important called West African Francophone state. But the problem is, even we had that, Senegal has a specificity because during this period, you have a rise of what we can call citizen, but it was very limited in the cities, and the citizen who can have the right, all the same right in France, was opposite to the main and most majority called the subject. You have opposition between citizen and subject, and it is, I think, one important things on the evolution of a society, people fighting to become citizen and fighting to have the same right than the citizen. And at this moment, you have a religious community which is playing an important role. Why? Because people who are subject have only right from the traditional right and the Muslim right. The right for family right, for example, all the right in the society are right coming from the Islamic sources in general, because they are not citizens. And it's a big deal. Even we can wait until independence, for example, to try to unify the law and begin giving citizenship to all. For example, the first step to give citizenship to people was during the 1987, and 3 years before, for example, independence, it was really at the last moment we have generalization of the law and citizenship for everybody. Sometimes these members are in harmony, and sometimes they come into conflict. It's normal because they are fighting to have the same right. And it is why in this country, for example, the subject, you can find the subject fighting very hard to become in some community. And I think one of the very interesting community where you have this kind of fight was in Cameroon. The role play, for example, by intellectual in Cameroon to fight and to have citizenship before having independence. It was a reality, of course. The citizenship and the subject in colonial Africa, you have a kind of hierarchy in French colony, people who are born in cities like Gorée, Dakar, Gorée, Saint-Louis, Rufisque, they participated to politics since a very long time and used to vote. All other African treated as subject rather than citizen in the colonial political order. You have evolution of Islam under colonial rule, emergence of Sufism as dominant form of Islam. It was a response, for example, to this kind of situation dichotomy created by the colonial period. I go very, very quickly. For example, in Senegal, you have a main order Sufi, Qadriya, Tijaniya, Mouridism, and they are characteristic by emphasis on spiritual path toward God, mysticism, non-violence, and brotherhood are generally Sunni and Maliki. And why non-violence is very important. It is, for example, today you have a kind of reflection on how to use the Sufi brotherhood to oppose this Islam to what is called violence in Islam in different political view. I think it is very interesting. And of course, in a country like Senegal, not only Senegal, the characteristic of Sufi brotherhood, you have African-born holy men called the Marabout. Marabout relating to the Almoravid revolution during the 11th century. You have close relationship between followers and Marabout, tend to be tolerant, most collaborative with colonial period. And what is interesting on what I say, how this position is used, for example, by Marabout to have influence on politics and to manipulate it sometimes the followers to participate it and to strengthen their position or their influence in the society, and having, of course, a lot of influence on politics until today. For example, the Senegalese model, you have this Senegalese model, no jihad, Sufi brotherhood do not challenge the secular state. It's very interesting for the view on citizenship. And the concept of republic and separation of church and state inherited from French colonial rule, not only French colonial rule, because on the pre-colonial also you have, I say that, you have the position of Islam, which was a very civic Islam, if working on the society, but not trying to control the power. And in a country like Senegal, one of the ways to see how citizenship is very important, it is the Senegalese family code. It's very interesting. Senegalese family code participated to unify, for example, the law. Senegalese family code participated to give citizenship to everybody, and Senegalese family code give a statue also a woman. It is one of the most important things on change about the question of citizenship. What is Islamic, political Islam, Sikh? For example, usually if people are not, for example, for the secular state, usually these people are coming from studying from Middle East, specifically Arab country, and when they come back, they don't speak French, but they speak Arabic and try to participate to the leadership and political leadership. And how to participate it? For example, one of their problem, issue is, for example, to fight against the secular state. And to say the constitution must change because we are Muslim society, we are having Muslim, for example, value, and we don't need to have a secular state. To criticize the Sufi brotherhood, because for them, the Sufi brotherhood is an obstacle for them to become, for example, in political Islam, and the Sufi brotherhood also is a kind of stopping, and it is perhaps one of the most important things in Senegal, to stop the political Islam. And the limit, for example, one of their issue also is to limit the role of women in society and to attack the Senegalese family code. Sufi brotherhood, of course, are very having lot of influence in politics. They, for example, try to participate in or to have influence on the choice of the citizen, but also the rise of citizenship is opposition to, for example, the role played by the influence of the Muslim leaders. And of course, some years ago, now things are very stable. All the influence we have, for example, what I call the re-Islamization of a society, everything. And I think that media play a very important role. If you go, for example, to the media, all the time you can listen, for example, for everything, inshallah, where all the time referring to religion and faith. Okay, no problem for that. And what is interesting also, the reference and the role of Islam is growing up. Even we still having the state, the Muslim state. And I think one of the reasons for that is, of course, the failure of ideology. Because in politics, we were socialists, we were Marxists, we were, of course, liberal. But today, all this ideology and trend, political trend, are not playing an important role. And it is why Islam is becoming very important. And the model of revolution of Iran was having a lot of influence on some elite. Okay. And we have also the rise of Arabization of African Islam. Of course, all these people coming from Middle East, using the Arab and say, okay, now we Arab must play an important role. But what is interesting, if even people are not really studying, for example, religion, if they come back, the only use of Islam present them as, of course, an Islam leader. And I think this question of Arabization is at the heart of the debate today of religious education. And the challenge, I think, today for Muslim world is to clarify the foundation of political Islam and to promote secular neutral state. We have interest as a minority, women. Have a minority, for example, in countries where you have, like in Senegal, you have a minority of Christian, very important. We can be in a good model if the state is neutral toward different religion. I think also Islam and individual freedom, only strengthening the role of women. We need a secular, for example, state to give the woman a position of woman in the society. If we need to have, for example, equality on political participation, I think we need to be in a neutral. In Senegal, we have twice prime minister who were women. Women are participating on debate. Even, for example, the family code is all the time questioned by Muslim leaders. People try, for example, to get more independence. And one thing which seems to me very interesting is, for example, the use by women to one of the pillars of Islam to be free. For example, pilgrimage at Mecca. Give a possibility to women to travel, even they are not educated, to become very strong women traders and things like that. They began that, but now women are, you can have some women who are very wealthy and participating on development. And I think another interesting thing also is the question of Islam and human rights. Need, for example, new interpretation. To reaffirm the importance of ijtihad, independent interpretation of legal texts, and focusing on the history of Islamic law or Sharia and developing Islamic feminism. I can tell you, during more than 20 years, I did a lot of feminism in Islam. But the theory of history of Sharia law is so very, because people, if are not very educated on religion, they can think that Sharia is a dogma. And what I did, for example, with my students is to show them Sharia is not a dogma. Sharia is a law, a response to a situation 2 centuries after the death of a prophet. It's different, for example, for the texts, and it is perhaps working on Sharia is changing the position of the law on women also. And I think it's very interesting and very important. What can I say in conclusion? The question of Islam and modernity are not incompatible. In 2005, 2006, I was a fellow of the National Endowment of Democracy in Washington, D.C. And one of the important debates was, for example, to use the right of some scholar, I can take Huntington, for example, and more Bernard Lewis, and they think, and it was, for example, the big opposition between Muslim countries and what is happening, for example, in Western civilization. And they say Islam is incompatible with democracy. And my work there was to say you must take in account what is happening in other countries, Muslim countries, like, for example, Senegal. Senegal is a very interesting example. It is a country of 95% of Muslims, where you have a Christian playing an important role on education, on scientific information, and playing important role everywhere. And the first president of Senegal, independent Senegal, was a Christian, President Senghor, supported by all the Muslim leaders and supported by Muslims who think that Senghor was the best because he was very well educated, very well trained, and he was, of course, a very good president for that. I think until today, Senghor is still a reference for our country. He is the most important father of the nation. I think it's very interesting. And the question of modernity also is to say, okay, we can be Muslim like us, but we can also be having right for women, having right for all the minorities, for example, not incompatible between Islam, for example, and modernity. And it was what I did when I was in Washington, D.C., and it was very interesting, for example. I think also the reason and personal interpretation are possible in Muslim societies. We cannot say, okay, Islam, halallah, halal Rasulullah, the God say, the Prophet say. Of course, if God say, the Prophet say, but in what context? What was, for example, the situation when God said and the Prophet? For example, the dichotomy of the right in Islam is very important. You have what we call the Surat Ibadat, where you have, for example, the main faith, for example, to say God is unique, to say La Shahada, everything. But you have in the Quran also what we call Surat Mu'amalat, Surat of society. After the Prophet left Mecca to Medina. What means the evolution of society need also to be questioned every time and to see, for example, how to understand the new challenge in new situation, for example, this kind of information. And of course, you have also religious tolerance. The religious tolerance must be cultivated, like in Senegal, or in African country, generally. I think in African country, Senegal, it's true for Mali, it's true even the Tuareg is manipulating today the religion. But Muslim tolerance is very important because Islam is very old in these countries, very, very, very ancient, playing an important role. And this kind of tolerance can participate it, of course, by giving to the religion the role playing on the society and giving to our religion also the place. And historically, I think it was the reality. Even you read, for example, the right of Arab writers, for example, like Ibn Khaldun, or before Ibn Khaldun, if you read on other old and ancient historical background, you can see what it is important. What it is important also is to preserve, of course, the historical legacy. I don't know why we can now, for example, be influenced by some countries, Saudi Arabia, Iran. Even we have our religion, which is very old, very well implemented, and why do we accept today, even we have the influence of the Arab dollar? And the experience of African Muslim countries must be taken into account in discussion concerning Islam and democracy. We need democracy. People have a religion, but we cannot renounce to a religion, and democracy is the only way we can have, for example, to have peaceful countries and peaceful way of life. Of course, thank you for listening me.
Thank you very much for coming. My name is Quinn Meekum. I teach in political science here at BYU. I have two questions for you. First, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the relations between the brotherhoods, particularly the Tijaniya and the Muridiya. Where do they collaborate? Where do they have conflicts? And also between the broader collection of Sufi brotherhoods and the reformist Muslims, mainly the urban centers, who are harshly critical of those brotherhoods. So that's question number one. The second is, you mentioned in your lecture that politicians are quite cognizant of Islam in how they campaign and how they interact. And I'm wondering if you could be specific about how politicians make calculations based on the role of Islam in Senegal.
I respond? Okay, I think that Senegal is a very particular country. The Sufi Brotherhood are playing a role, of course, having a lot of influence on the society. And the main Sufi Brotherhood, we have four which are very important. The Muridiya, the Tijaniya, which spread everywhere in West Africa. Muridiya is very local, but very strong, because very well organized, a very pyramidal organization, and having what Donald Cruz O'Brien called the charisma. The leader is charismatic leader, usually, and having a lot of influence on the population. And the implementation of the Murid in the rural area, people who are not very well educated, is a reality in Senegal. And for the Tijaniya, they usually are implemented on the cities, from the long railway cities, from Saint-Louis to Dakar. And usually, and now things are changing a little, they are intellectual, the elite, of course, etc. But the problem is the Murid are very strong economically. They control, some years ago, the economy of peanuts, for example. You have very nice books written by Christian Coulon, Les Marabouts de la Kenkopans, Les Marabouts de la Rachid. And I think these Murid are, after the crisis during the 80s, they organize the followers, for example, for immigration, usually in Italy, in Spain, and even in the United States. And these followers return back a lot of money to the and give some independence and autonomy to the brotherhood. But the problem is they need also the state. They need the state to strengthen their position. And what is very bad in Senegal is, for example, the kind of competition between the Sufi Brotherhood. For example, I can give you one example, is when we have, for example, the beginning of religious, for example, month comment on dit jeûner encore? To fast, for example, they are not having the same position, and the Murid try, for example, to have their own position. It means that the community is divided every time. Not only, but they are following the view of the religion, but it's just to show that they have influence, they have to push the government to do what they want, and things like that. And I think now it become a kind of obstacle for Senegal. And using, for example, the economic, and they control this thing and stop the economical evolution, I think it is becoming something not very good. But in another way, the Sufi Brotherhood help also, for example, for fighting the political Islam, fighting, for example, the Islamic terrorism, we don't know, but they are participating to control the society and participating to some stability in the society. And of course, the question of reformation was very important during the 17th century until the 19th or around 2000. Because it was the first time people coming from Arabic countries have come back with political view. Like, for example, Touré for UCM, Union Culturelle Musulmane, the cultural Muslim organization. And these reformists had, for example, to fight until some years the Sufi Brotherhood, because the Sufi Brotherhood are tradition and not, of course, opening for change, fighting against feminists like us, or fighting against what they call the Freemason, because they think that the secular state is an invention of the Freemason, or fighting, of course, against all these people who are trying to promote more democracy or things like that. And they play an important role. They were not successful. For what? Because the Sufi Brotherhood and the Muslim leaders were very strong and very powerful. Of course, they did what they wanted to do and organizing new association, participating on debate. But now they are trying another way, of course, to have more pacification of the relation with the Sufi leader, and of course trying to say, okay, you are strong, feminists and things on international level everywhere are strong. We wait for another occasion to change the situation. Okay.
My name is Kevin Huffner. I'm an international relations major. So you've spoken about the French influences, but also the Arab influences. My question is, why are some of the Arab influences sort of outweighing those French Western influences, and what can the West and countries like Senegal, who are Islamic but secular, do to influence neighboring countries and countries in the Middle East to embrace modernity and secularism?
I think Senegal is really very supported by the developing country, and specifically for that by United States. And the influence of France is very important, because Senegal was what I can call la colonie, the colony, the model after Algeria. Because Algeria was a kind of prolongement, something which a continuation of France, because it was a colony of peuplement, colony of settlement, of course. But Senegal was the colony because it was the country where, for example, France created the first schools, for example. It was the colony where France, for example, settled, and they did never think about one day they could go. If I go, for example, in our White House, usually I say, the French people, if they thought that one day they should leave, probably they would never build this wonderful house. I think Senegal, they've created lot of roads, infrastructure, if you compare to other countries. And of course, they are never ready, for example, to leave Senegal. And it was a country where the elite really were very well assimilated. Even they are Muslims. They are something, they were also French people assimilated. And the first elite in West African, even in Africa, Francophone Africa, were coming from Senegal. And the school were school of integration. I think the role of schools is very important for that. And the influence of France also, I think it's an influence you can see, the very psychological influence. Even it's not only for economical reason, but Senegal is also a strategic country. Strategic country, the position of the country is very important. For example, today I know, for example, the United States must create a settlement for Africa.com. Because it is the country, you can control from this country what is happening to the other country, African countries. It is why I think also Saudi Arabia try or another country to have a lot of influence, because Senegal is the door of Africa. And if you have, for example, ideas from Senegal, it can influence the rest of Africa. And it is why I think the strategical role of Senegal is still very important. And we have also this influence of two kinds of elite. Elite, Western educated, like all of us, controlling the power in general, and the institution, because the model of institution we have also in Senegal is the model of French institution, État jacobin, and French institution, and the political game looks like, of course, what is happening usually in France. But the problem also is all these people went to Saudi Arabia or to Iran or another Muslim country having training, come back, and they need to have a place in the political situation. And it is why I think we have a very good scholar called Usman Khan, teaching at the University of Harvard. And he say, and it was also my point of view, it's very important, for example, to make a kind of link and interaction between two kinds of elite, the elite coming from Arabophone, speaking Arab, and the elite speaking French. And now we can say all these elite are also speaking English. It is, I think, something can be very good, but it is something also can be a problem. It is why we are negotiating this last year, a new consensus, a new project of society. I think we can integrate it and incorporate it, the view of the other elite, and try also to have a new kind of education system, a new kind, for example, of doing politics and democracy, and all these elites coming from Arab also are participating to the political games. Okay.
Mostly Hatfield from the history department, and I am wondering more about the Senegalese feminist movement, because for me, Senegal is known for its feminist movement, and I'm wondering, for you, how do you explain the rise of feminism within Senegal? And even many of us think Islamic countries wouldn't have a feminist movement, so how does that fit in with the Islamic society?
I think we have combination of different things. The first thing I think is education. A critical group of women, very well trained and educated. For example, in 1960, we had the first woman who entered the university. I think this is something very important. The second thing is, we have our former president, Senghor, was of course working what we call feminism of the state. The feminism of the state by promoting a family code, by promoting, of course, and introducing women in development just after 1976, creating the first ministry of women condition. But he also helped for creating a movement of women and association. this first movement of women were not a feminist movement, but it was a feminine movement. Mariama Ba, for example, this author used by the student of Chantal, Mariama Ba belonged to this generation of women. Tata Anen Bay Derneville is one of the leading women, for example, on this point of view. And this, of course, you have a lot of association of women. And the first woman educated before women go to university, usually they were working on education, low level of education. They were working on health care, and things like that. But you have another generation of women during the turning point called 1968, the revolution, the kind of revolution in France, and they were sociologists like Marie-Angélique Savané, like Fatou Sow, a very brilliant scholar, and they try to deconstruct and do the work about, for example, feminism. And at this moment, they were not really very important group, but group of intellectuals in a movement called Yewi Yewi, for example, to try to be awareness, to be aware and give awareness to other women. They play an important role. And I think, of course, the government knows that these kind of women can play an important role on strengthening the secular state and, for example, limiting the role played by the group of religious. And myself, my difference of these is I am working on Islam and what I can call the feminism in Islam. And of course, our ideas, even we were a minority, but we had a lot of influence on the society. And of course, we were supported also, I can tell you, by the international organization, by the international, for example, group and strong country like United States. Specifically, for example, me, I was really very well supported by different universities from here, even the government, and protecting also in the international level. It was why I did the job I did in my country. And today, of course, we have a parity law. I am not myself the big supporter of the parity law, because I think the woman participating and only playing a role on what they can call access to political decision-making politics is important, but not the only thing which can change the society. We need to come from the grassroots to change the society, to give more right, to fight against violence, for example, or things like that. Before coming, the result will be, of course, if women are very well educated, to the control of power. We don't need, for example, to have a law for parity, but we must work to change, in fact, the situation in the society. Okay.
My name is Ashlyn Earl. I'm studying English here. Thank you for your lecture. I'm particularly interested in the family code that you spoke about, and I wonder if you are seeing similar secular trends in other African countries which have a high Islamic population.
Tunisia. I can tell you that Tunisia and Senegal were the only countries which had family code or status personnel during the 70s, on 1970. Bourguiba and Senghor on this way was really good leaders. But even today, I can tell you, some countries have a lot of difficulties to promote a family code. Mali, for example. And Niger. All these countries have a lot of resistance. For example, in Niger, I used to talk to people. If you are very successful, it means you need, if you are a man, to be married to several women. Even they are intellectual, they must agree. Even in my country, polygamy is a reality. But I think you can discuss and say polygamy is not the good thing. Even you are doing that, it's not the best way to modernize a society, for example. In Mali, the role of religious association is so important in the influence of the Arab world. Since a very long time, they are fighting to have a family code, but they can't have it. I think it's a big problem. And now, for example, in ECOWAS, they are trying, for example, a kind of uniformization of the law. They are trying, for example, to make awareness, but I think it's still very, very, very difficult. But for example, in Morocco, the king, when he arrived after the death of Hassan II, promote what we called la mudawana, for example, to give more right to women in Morocco. But something I can tell, and it's very important, is the role played by the women scholar in Morocco, like Fatima Mernissi, another woman who have very strong thought about the question of women in Islam. I think it is few countries, but these few countries must, for example, be a leader. But something I really regret today is the weakness of the international, movement of women. After Beijing, I think people think that it's enough. Even we have ONU Femmes, I think they don't have too much money to go on the work. And perhaps it is time for us, all of us, to do more work, to have more money from the countries, and trying, for example, to be more on the women right. I think for some countries, the gender issue is not enough. We need real feminist issue to change the society.
Thank you.